All right, we'll stand up so that we play our national anthem and the East African anthems as well. So, DJ. Thank you so much. We can have a seat. So we'll go straight to introductions, starting with the front table. Just quickly tell us your name and the organization you're coming from. We'll only recognize the online participants, but we'll allow you to 1 minute, less than 1 minute, introduce yourself. Do we have an extra mic? Please.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Benson Ireri, and I work with the World Resources Institute, or WRI, and I lead the Energy Access work for Africa.
Hi, good morning. My name is Samson Orao. I work with ActionAid Kenya, the Programs and Strategy Lead. Thanks.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Mithika Mwenda, the Executive Director, Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance.
Good morning, everyone. My name is George Awala. I'm a Business Pursuit Lead for Horn of Africa for Voluntary Service Overseas, VSO.
Good morning, everybody. This is Nitin Kenny Papachan from Adventist Development and Relief Agency, Kenya, Country Director.
Good morning, everyone. Caroline Mutinda, ActionAid Kenya.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Msila, Communications ActionAid Kenya.
Good morning. My name is Amos Takona, journalist working for
Simon Osundwa, World Renew.
Abdia Gedi from Isiolo.
Maka Kasim from Garissa County.
Mary Likama, Ilangata West. Good morning once more. I'm Rebecca Kioko from Makueni County.
Anastasia Plilan from Baringo County.
Flora January from Taita Taveta County.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Ndonye from the ASAL Humanitarian Network.
Good morning, Boniface Maina, Ecovista, Kenya. Good morning, everyone. Dennis Omoyo Ryoki from ActionAid Kenya.
Hey, good morning. I'm Daniel Odinga from ActionAid Kenya.
Good morning, Sylvia Washira from PACJA.
All right, I want to believe everybody has introduced themselves. We have a program for us, and
across the Horn of Africa. My name is Samson Orao. I'm the Programs and Strategy Lead at ActionAid Kenya. I'm sitting in for our Executive Director who's out of the country, Susan Otieno, though she's joined us online. And today, not to make many comments, but just to welcome everybody to this press release. We are discussing a very dire situation, not just for Kenya, but particularly for the Horn of Africa countries. And we have seen how the food situation, the food crisis, the water crisis, and how this has affected communities, particularly women and children living in poverty and exclusion, and how then has led to many issues with a lot of resources being directed towards health response. So we have here, I'm not speaking on behalf of the organizations, but we have here a need for urgent action then to stem any humanitarian catastrophe, and hence why we have invited you here today. So I just want to thank various colleagues who have joined us here today, and also thank the media for having also heeded our call to join us in this meeting. And karibuni sana. There's still breakfast going on, so you can have your breakfast after the meeting is done. And let's engage to treat this matter and give it the seriousness and weight it deserves. Thank you very much.
clap for Samson. Thank you so much, Samson. Women who experience from kindly unity and representatives from different counties who are affected. I want to welcome from Kajiado, Abdi Flora January from Taita Taveta, Anshel Pilar from Baringo. Karibuni, just have a seat. To share with us at the counties or where they're faced by climate change crisis. We want to hear from them before even we go to our statement. So, karibu sana. Mike, please. So I want to start with Maka Kasim from Garissa. just introduce yourself, tell us what's happening in Garissa.
Okay, thank you. Kwa majina naitwa Makakasi from Garissa County, from Kamude Women's Rights Network in partnership with ActionAid Kenya. For what I have experienced and seen in our Garissa County, drought affected our people and animals mostly. It affected our animals, whereby animals are dying because of pasture and water, and also outbreak of diseases, unknown diseases, whereby we have taken the veterinary officers to the ground to make check-up of the disease, but they have said there is no disease they are seeing, but without the animals are dying because of hunger. The next thing is that our women are suffering and children due to the long-term services of looking water from a far place, almost 20 kilometers to the river. They are waking up in the midnight to Tana River, which is the next water point. On their way, these wildlife animals also looking for the same water. They are meeting with the women and men on the road, which is also very dangerous to them. When it comes to drought, it normally affects mostly women and children, because women, we are the one who is breastfeeding, who are carrying baby on their stomach. By those periods, anemia occurs due to inefficient food. What I have seen is that our people, our women, are taking lunch morning, and they take 1 meal per day. 1 meal per day. Because of the drought, they are pastoralists. Some, they lost all the animals and they joined farming, whereby ActionAid really supported the communities with seeds and seedlings, and also what we call Sudan grass. The Sudan grass, they are planting near the rivers so that the weak animals can survive there. They also supported with the cash transfer for 300 households for 4,500 per month. Actually, ActionAid responses the quickest respond when the people are in need. They also supported with 150 households with cash transfer also. They supported with food in school, which is also preventing the children to drop out from schools.
Kasim, I'll give you 1 minute.
Yes. What I can say is that drought is something prolonged, and it needs quickest response where necessary. The quickest response that the communities are now in need is food and also water. And actually, really supported with 40 trips of water, and they bought 2 tons of 5,000 liters, and also some other 210 liters of water tanks.
Thank you so much.
If we talk of the drought is something long, it is something that is affecting our people, and we need the quickest response, even from the other NGOs, to go to it.
Thank you so much, Kasim, and thanks for sharing your experience.
Yes.
I'll go to Kajiado. Mama Mary, nataka tuelezee kwa ufupi ni nini inafanyika huko Kajiado hasa ambayo inaadhiri kina mama.
Na wasalimu mara tena. Mimi naitwa Mary Likama, nimetoka Kajiado, Lang'ata West LRP. Sisi kama wamama wa Kajiado tunaumia kwa sababu ya kiangazi ambayo imekaa kwa miaka 3 tukiwa hatupati mvua. So wamama wanaathirika kwa sababu wazee wamehama, wameacha maboma. Sasa wamama tu wamebaki peke yao na watoto. Unakuta hata watoto wakienda shule wakienda shule hata wanakosa maji ya kupikiwa, hata ngaa kama mtu alikuwa na chakula kidogo wanakosa. Sasa mimi ninaomba, kwa sababu wamama wanapitia katika hali ngumu. Wanatoka saa 9 ya usiku, wanakuja saa 9 ingine ya mchana. Ile hali wakipitia hivyo, wanakutana na wanyama ambayo sasa unakuta wamama hawana security ya kutosha katika hiyo hali kwa sababu ya wazee waliacha na wakaenda. Watoto pia wanapitia katika hali ngumu ya njaa. Kwa sababu Wamasai wanapohamisha ng'ombe wanasahau na maboma. Wanaacha watoto, wanaacha wamama, wanabaki peke yao. Chenye mimi ninaomba kama representative wa Ilodo Kilani, ninaomba NGOs wengine kama itawezekana, saa hizi ni uhai ya watu ndio unatoka. Tunaomba tupatie chakula na maji kwa sababu tunaumia na sasa uhai ndio unaendelea kuisha. Naomba pia serikali wapate kutusaidia. If possible, ninaomba hata saa hii mpate kutusaidia.
Asante sana Mama Mary. Tutaelekea huko Isiolo kwa Abdi. Tuelezee ni vipi na ni nini inaendelea katika kaunti ya Isiolo.
Okay. Habari zenu tena. Mimi naitwa Abdi Gedi, natoka Isiolo. Huko Isiolo ukame kwanza iko hali ya juu. Karibu miaka 3, zaidi ya miaka 3 hatujapata mvua. So sisi kama kina mama tunaathirika sana. Na katika ile hali ya kutafuta maji pia tunaathirika. Unaweza kuta mama labda amepigwa na amepatana na mnyama wa pori, anapoteza maisha yake, ama anapatana tu na adui mwingine. In case vitu kama rape inaweza tendeka katikati. Kitu ya pili ni kwamba watoto wetu wanaandika kwa sababu ya ukosefu wa chakula. Hakuna chakula kabisa kwa sababu vitu zimekauka. Tunapata shida ya chakula. Watoto wale wako chini ya miaka 5 wanaumia zaidi. Hata kwenda shule imekuwa ni shida zaidi kwa sababu shule yenyewe hata ina chakula, na mtoto akirudi nyumbani hakuna chakula. Akienda shule zamani tunatuma watoto shule ndio wengine wapate chakula huko shule, lakini sasa hizi hata shule yenyewe hakuna chakula na nyumbani ndio zaidi wasi. So unaweza pata watoto wanatoroka kwenda shule, inakuwa ni problem.
Asante sana. Tuelekee huko Makueni. Rebecca, tuelezee ni nini inafanyika huko.
Habari zenu. Kwa majina ni Rebecca Kioko, natoka Makueni County. Huko kwetu tuko na hii komiti ya DRRC yenye inasimamia mambo ya majanga, na vile huko kwetu tumeharibika vibaya sana. Hakuna mvua tangu 3 years, hatujapata mvua. Ukame umekuwa mwingi, watoto wamekosa chakula kwa mashule, wazazi pia hawana chakula, na sana sana wenye wanaathirika sana ni wakina mama. Kwa hivyo mimi naomba kama serikali inaweza ingililia ndani na ijaribu kusaidia kwa chakula ya watoto, kwa mashule na pia manyumbani. Tukiangalia upande wa maji hakuna. Kuna wenye wako karibu na mto Athi, na hiyo maji ya mto Athi saa zingine inakuanga chafu sana, haitumiki kwa kukunywa, hata mifugo ikikunywa huko ingine na kufa. Unaona hata samaki walio ndani huko wanaanza kukufa. Hiyo ni ishara ya kuonyesha kana kwamba hata kama watu wanaweza tumia hiyo maji pia inaweza waadhiri. So naomba kama NGOs wengine kama wanaweza ingilia ndani ndio watusaidie. Ndio sasa tukiangalia upande wa chakula hakunanga hata moja. Ukiingia kwa mashamba imekauka kabisa. Tena huko mvua inanyesha for very little, inanyesha very little, yenye inakuja huko ni kidogo sana. So naomba mtuangalie vizuri. Na kama hii serikali ya mtukufu tunamwita nani Ruto mwenye alichukua hii mamlaka. Niliona jana kwa news akisema ati amelist 20,000 of rice na 20,000 of beans. Sijui alikuwa anazipeleka wapi, sijui ni Makueni, sijui ni Baringo. Ajaribu sana atuletee hiyo chakula. Na NGOs wengine pia wa intervene ndio tupate chakula. Asanteni.
Asante sana Rebecca. Wacha tusikie kutoka Flora kutoka Taita Taveta.
Asante sana. Kwa majina naitwa Flora Januari, natoka Taita Taveta, eneo la Kishushe. Na katika eneo la Kishushe huwa tunategemea sana sana kilimo na ufugaji wa mifugo. Lakini tumekuwa na changamoto ya muda wa miaka mitatu kufikia sasa hatujapata mvua. Kwa hivyo wananchi wa kule tunakosa chakula ya kutosha, hata kule mashuleni hakuna chakula. Tumefanya survey, unakuta mtu anategemea anakula mara moja kwa siku. Hiyo imekuwa changamoto kwa upande wa chakula. Na kwa upande wa maji huwa tunategemea source moja ambayo inaitwa Kishenyi Dam, ambapo kwa sasa imekauka completely, hakuna maji. Na kule kwetu Kishushe tunategemea maji ya visima ambayo imechimbwa, na maji hayo ni chumvi, hata zingine si chumvi, tuseme ni magadi. Na hiyo ndio jamii inatumia. So kwa upande wa health nafikiri tuko na changamoto, watoto wetu hatujui ama sisi wenyewe hatujui kama itakuwaje. Tunatumia maji machafu sana. Tunasaidiwa maji maybe yale masafi na Buza, lakini unakuta mtu anapata mtungi miwili. Baada ya wiki ndio unapata mtungi ingine miwili. So imekuwa changamoto. Na janga lingine ambalo limetuasiri sana ni wanyama pori. Ndovu wamezidi, wanazunguka. Hata kufikia jana shule zimefunguliwa, lakini watoto wetu tuliwazuia wasiende shuleni sababu wanyamapori wamezidi. Wanazunguka hata kwa manyumba, wameharibu matangi ya maji. Mahali tunawekewa maji unakuta ndovu inaenda inapasua na inakunywa maji kabisa. Hiyo ndio changamoto tuko nayo kufikia sasa. So tunaomba serikali ama mashirika pia na county government waweze kuingilia kuona kwamba tunakaa namna gani mahali hapo Kishushe.
Asante sana. Acha tuelekee Baringo tusikie kutoka Anastasia.
Asanteni sana. Naitwa Anastasia Plilan kutoka Baringo County, eneo la Tangulbei, Tiati. So pia nami niko na mambo ya drought kule, ni kama vile wenzangu wamesema ya kuwa kwa muda mrefu hatujapata mvua, na kule huwa tunategemea wanyama na pia ukulima. Na ukiangalia saa hizi vile hakuna mambo ya mvua, unaona hakuna chakula kabisa kutoka kwa mashamba. Licha ya kufunzwa jinsi ya kulima ile kuweza kukimu mambo ya kiangazi kama agroecology, hizo techniques tumejaribu kuziapply kule, lakini kwa sababu mvua haikunyesha, hata hiyo pia haikufanya. Pia mifugo kule wamekufa kwa sababu ya kukosa lishe, na kwa hivyo currently mnasikia saa hizi mambo ya insecurity ambayo kwa sasa hata nikiwa hapa hivi mambo sio mzuri kule. Na ukiangalia mambo ya insecurity imekuwa ni pia imeleta na mambo ya kiangazi. Wanaume wamehama, wengine wako Uganda, na wale ambao wamebaki kule wameenda kuiba kwa majirani, na kuiba kule ile hasira huwa inafikia kina mama na watoto, kwa sababu wanaume ndio wanakosi hizi mambo yote na wao wanatoroka, wanajua jinsi ya kujificha. Lakini unaona mama pamoja na watoto wake wanajaribu kujikokota jinsi ya kuhepa maneno yale, lakini unaona kwamba wameathirika sana. So licha ya kuwa kuna mambo ya kiangazi, kuna pia mambo ya insecurity, na kama jamii wamejaribu kutegemea wild fruits, hiyo matunda ya msituni, lakini kwa sababu ya climate change hata hiyo matunda imekuwa na wadudu, wameshindwa jinsi ya kutengeneza ili wale, kwa sababu wakijaribu kuvuna unaona yale matunda imejaa wadudu. So pia maji kule hakuna, watu wanategemea maji ambayo ni chafu. So ningeomba serikali ya kuwa kulingana na mipango yao na pia well wishers wa intervene, waingilia kule kwa sababu ya mambo ya drought vile wanaweza kurespond, na pia mambo ya insecurity. Kule huko ndio kuna bandits na kuna watu kule ambao hawataki mambo ya bandits. Tumechanganyika, hatujui tutafanya namna gani, kwa sababu jina ya Mpokot squeeze umekuwa tu bandit, licha ya kuwa pengine unajaribu kujiondoa kwa yale. Kwa hivyo ninaomba, kwa sababu hii imekuwa tumeogopa hata kujiintroduce. Ukitaka kutembea unaambia nyinyi ndio mnafanya hivi, nyinyi ndio mnamwaga damu, nyinyi ndio mnafanya hivi. Imekuwa ni neno mbaya sana kwetu. So ningeomba mashirika waingilie, waone vile watuondoe kwa hii literacy, ama ni sijui ni poverty, ama sijui ni nini ambayo imerudisha Kenya nyuma. Kwa sababu sasa hii Kenya ikisikika mambo ya bandits inakuwa ni huko. Ikisikika mambo ya illiteracy inakuwa ni huko. Mambo ya drought bado ni hawa Pokot ndio wanaumia. So ningeomba serikali msione ni gharama sana kusaidia watu, lakini mtuletee suluhisho ambayo itafanya tuishi na wengine vizuri na ambayo itainua hii jamii wahisi kuwa ni wa Kenya kama wengine. So asante sana. Mungu awabariki.
Thank you so much. Tunashukuru sana kina mama. Thank you so much, women, for those experience sharing. I want to request the EDs and CEOs who are here before to join them in reading the statement. I want to recognize the online participants who are here with us. We'll give you a chance to say something once we read the statement. So, EDs, CEO, please welcome and join. Please join the Please, any organizations represented here? All right, I've been requested to allow EDs who are planning this meeting with us, please have a seat, who are online, to just quickly introduce themselves before we go straight to the press statement. Any ED? Susan, I know you're online. Please, yes.
Greetings from Madrid. This is just to stand in solidarity with every Kenyan, every organization represented, and just to say that it is unacceptable, it should not be encouraged, and any action that ought to be taken or is being planned to be taken ought to be taken now at a point with a view of saving lives, and at the same time looking to ensure that despite the actions, we look for long-term solutions. We have a responsibility as a government, we have responsibility as citizens, and most importantly, globally, we have responsibility to ensure that we do not see a repeat year in, year out, or drought, and people threatened to severe famine and starvation that is leading to death. So I just want to share my solidarity and to say that every effort is needed because every life counts in this process. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susan. Who else is online? Any ED, CEO, director online? Just 1 minute. Anyone else who wants to say something online so that we don't leave anyone who participated in the planning for this press? All right, I cannot see anyone responding, but I want to go straight and hand over this session to the EDs to read the statement. Welcome.
So, thank you once again. My name is Mithika from Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. And you can see, if you look at this statement, it has signed on. More organizations will be appending their signatures. You can see most of us come from the development organizations. Some of us work on climate action. Others work on relief, humanitarian. We have also faith-based organizations and women organizations. And as you can see, this is the leadership of organizations. And most of our colleagues are the executive director of ActionAid. has joined us online because most of them may not be here present, but we have a large presence of our colleagues following online. So we come here to shout out. We want to blow the horn as we join the desperately unhindered voices like the ones which have spoken here, of those who have come to denounce the lack of full commitment by the world leaders to cooperate and end the spiraling hunger crisis in the Horn of Africa. It is outrageous that in a world where there is enough to feed everyone, people are still dying of hunger, and hundreds of millions are on the brink of famine, despite promises to never again give famine a chance in this century. It is now imminent in Somalia and Horn of Africa. We take the attitude of the world leaders to demonstrate that the livelihoods and dignity of the people of the Horn of Africa matters less than race and endless bickering among global capitalist powers on who should control the levers of technological and economic advancement. There have been several unhindered calls, but leaders have failed to lead. In late August, 44 Anglican bishops from South Sudan and Kenya issued an open letter to the UK government appealing for urgent intervention in what they termed as the worst drought in 40 years, expressing fears that early warnings were not hindered and that existing commitments to strengthen resilience have not been backed up by funding that is so desperately needed. Expressing our solidarity with the Anglican and Catholic bishops, we are constrained by ones to explain the distress with which lactating mothers, the elderly, the disabled, and the children are finding themselves due to the phenomenon that is not accidental nor instant. We are staring at a devastating climate-fueled catastrophe of immeasurable proportions which has been building over years, while not enough action has been taken following the early warnings of the imminent humanitarian disaster projected by climate change experts and the civil society. Due to prolonged drought, farmers have been unable to harvest their crops for 5 consecutive seasons. Pastoralists, communities have lost much of their livestock. You have heard the evidence here, including camels, cattle, goats, and sheep. Alarming in the Horn of Africa is that at least 36.1 million people have now been affected by the drought which began in October 2020. This figure represents a significant increase from July 2022, when an estimated 19.4 million people were affected, reflecting the impact of the climate change-motivated drought in the region. This figure represents a significant growth in climate and humanitarian vulnerability of communities across 3 states, as 24.1 million people in Ethiopia, 7.8 million in Somalia, almost half of the population, and 4.2 million in Kenya are pushed to the edge of access to food and water. Across the 3 states, a minimum of 20.5 million people are already waking each day to high levels of acute insecurity and rising malnutrition. According to the Food Security and Nutrition Working Group, this figure could rise to 23 to 26 million by February 2023. This, to call it what it is the manifestation of failure to build resilient nations in the face of climate crisis that demands political will and urgent, decisive actions, and the characterization of loss and damage at the center of discussion in the ongoing global policy discourse on climate change. The loss and damage as a result of the rapidly changing and more intense weather events such as the Horn of Africa drought crisis forms the basis for Africa's key priority issues during the forthcoming Africa COP27 in Egypt later in November this year. We are alarmed by the high levels of malnutrition, also affecting young people whose plight is oftentimes forgotten. About 4.6 million children and 986,100 pregnant and lactating women in the region are acutely malnourished in the drought-affected areas. A total of 1.2 million children are acutely a total of 1.23 million children actually malnourished, and so far hundreds have died in nutrition centers. More than 16.2 million people cannot access enough water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning, including 8.2 million in Ethiopia, 3.9 million in Somalia, and 4.1 million in Kenya. Many water points have dried up or diminished in quality, heightening the risk of waterborne diseases and increasing the risk of skin and eye infections as families are forced to ration their water use and prioritize drinking and cooking over hygiene. Rivers and water ponds where farmers were drawing water and livestock owners were watering their animals have all dried up. Farmers were fighting with livestock owners over watering points and grazing areas, but now there is even nothing to fight over. Water points have dried up, while the remaining grazing areas have vanished. Over 8.9 million livestock have perished, which pastoralist families rely upon for sustenance and livelihoods, including 3.5 million in Ethiopia and 2.4 million in Kenya and over 3 million in Somalia. The crisis has heightened protection risks for women and children, particularly girls who have become more vulnerable under sexual and gender violence, based violence, abuse, sexual exploitation, and child labor. Female-handed households and adolescent girls are particularly vulnerable to increased violence, exploitation, and abuse. The number of children dropping out of school is rising, with reports of girls being married off by their struggling families surfacing in all the affected countries. Child, early and forced marriages are being used as a negative coping mechanism to lessen demands on family resources and potentially get money that they can use to buy food and other necessities. In Somalia, the drought emergency has disrupted education for 1.7 million children, of whom 720 million, 47% of them girls, are at risk of dropping out of school. In Ethiopia, more than 41,000 children are out of school due to this drought. These are not isolated climate-induced drought occurrences. In the past 10 years, the Horn of Africa has endured 3 severe climate-triggered droughts, that is from 2010 to 2011, 2016 to 2017, and 2020 to 2022. Efforts in building resilience to climate change in the region have not kept pace with the frequency, prolonged, and the severity of droughts in recent years, making it harder for families to recover between shocks. The increasing frequency of shocks in the region has eroded inherent capacities in communities to adapt, while leaving vulnerable communities too short a time to recover and bounce back. So not that we didn't see this coming, sadly. We have done it, we have seen it. Scientists have repeatedly warned of insufficient rainfall and prolonged drought, mostly attributed to the changing climate. The meteorological agencies have accurately predicted that rainfall would not be enough. We are saddened to see the results of this inaction, despite numerous warnings, and yet global leaders continue to drag their feet when it comes to honoring climate financing pledges. This is happening at a time when the Green Climate Fund, that is the main climate fund multilateral organization, the body which we expected to ease bureaucracy associated with the World Bank and the other financial institutions, has turned out to be another nightmare in disbursing money meant for emergencies like the one witnessed in the Horn of Africa. For a multilateral institution that was meant to be easily accessible and quicker in response, it has been painfully slow for organizations to access the funds to ensure urgent and adaptation interventions. The people from the Horn of Africa now can apply for funds and die, become forgotten, and their next generation will wait long to receive the money, which is meant for urgent adaptation intervention. To complicate matters for the Horn of African communities experiencing an deadly crisis is the warring control mechanisms of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and its processes by transnational corporations, which seems to value profit over life, leading to failure in honoring commitments to pool resources that can support most vulnerable countries to adapt and strengthen their resilience to climatic shocks. So we have now, out of all that background, we have our appeal, and they are point by point. I think I'll read the appeal number 1, then we are going to share it with our colleagues. So appeal A is towards addressing humanitarian crisis, and I will read this and then hand over to my ActionAid colleague so that he can go through the other one. So on this, towards the Horn of African governments, the governments in the Horn of Africa, we are saying the humanitarian crisis must be responded to at the urgently needed speed and scale. All available funding for humanitarian and development pipelines should be released to the frontline communities immediately. Number A, we want them to provide leadership and pay attention to the crisis while investing in creating evidence to inform long-term interventions considering the impact of anger on various groups of people, such as children, adolescents, women, and people with disabilities. They should suspend all other development priorities and divert the national budget and human resources. Immediately, national budgets should prioritize providing food and nutrition assistance, water for domestic use, as well as nutrition guidance supported through expanding drilling and the rehabilitation of boreholes and increasing protection services for prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, exploitation, and abuse. B, ensure transparency and accountability in the distribution of relief assistance and support humanitarian organizations for relief and distribution. C, lay out long-term adaptation, resilient, and recovery strategies, including diversification of livelihood options of communities, such as more older irrigation systems, promoting off-farm income-generating activities for SMEs, livestock restocking. Number 2, for GCF, that is, interventions such as school meals must be expanded to ensure all children remain in school and girls are protected from all harmful practices, including early child and forced marriages, sexual and gender-based violence, abuse, and exploitation. So I'll leave now Samson to go through the point number 2 of our demand.
Thank you, Mithika. To address the climate issues, we need to look at long-term goals, and we need to look at resilience. And we are calling upon governments and world leaders then to fast-track the climate actions and the various commitments that have been made globally. And so we have about 7 action items here. I'll probably just take the first 2, then invite my ADRA colleague to take the next 2, and perhaps VSO and WRI can also take the other 2. The first action that we as members of civil society are calling upon world governments is to make an urgent call for governments and regional bodies, their leadership and their institutions in implementing national and regional climate change and the recently approved Africa Union Climate Change Response Strategy, as well as the Action Plan 2022 to 2032, the 10-year action plan. We also call on the UNFCCC and the COP presidency to put adaptation on top of the agenda, the climate change adaptation on top of the agenda at the upcoming COP27 this year. It must be operationalized to elaborate on the global goal adaptation by COP28, with COP27 delivering an ambitious plan on how to meet the current and future needs for adaptation financing in Africa by 2025 and beyond.
COP27 must move from rhetoric to demonstrable actions by ensuring the target of 50-50 split between mitigation and adaptation finance is not only met but surpassed in favor of adaptation. Additionally, climate finance for adaptation must be delivered to African countries through grants and must be new and additional to official development assistance based on their needs and special circumstances. Financing modalities must be redesigned to give support to those who are directly impacted by climate change, affected communities, and their organizations. Call on global communities in COP27 convening to ensure the amount of climate finance reaching local communities is urgently increased and barriers to accessing climate finance are removed. Investment in local climate action must be guided by the principles for locally led adaptation and should be formally endorsed by all parties to the UNFCCC, including GCF. A new goal for the proportion of climate finance going to local level action should be considered at COP27.
As an imperative of climate justice, that a shared global responsibility for loss and damage be expressed proportionately through loss and damage fund. So this is a fund that will be able to channel finances to those who need it most, especially in Africa, because we know that Africa does not really generate so much of some of the gases and other things that cause pollution, yet we suffer the most. So as a minimum, we really demand that an institutional mechanism is put in place for addressing loss and damage, and this must be resolved within the next COP, that is COP27. We also urge the Africa group of negotiators and governments to pursue climate finance definitions that are friendly to the continent for tabling at COP27 to enhance additional financing for adaptation and loss and damage with a quantifiable goal by 2024.
Thank you. And last but not least, we call upon all parties to consider the role and capacity of the civil society organizations in loss and damage response, and to fast-track mechanisms for easing access to climate finance to civil society organizations. I think that brings us to the end of our request. But I think, as Mithika had also mentioned earlier on, this has been signed on by quite a number of organizations, including ActionAid International Kenya, Action Against Hunger, ADRA Kenya, All African Conference of Churches, AMREF, ASAL Humanitarian Network, CAFOD, Catholic Relief Services, Christian Aid, Code Aid, Helen Keller Foundation, HelpAge, Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, or PACJA, Plan International, International Aid Services Kenya, International Alert, Medicine Sans Frontiers, Misericor, SOS Children's Home, Voluntary Services Overseas, and finally, World Resources Institute. Thank you very much. And I'm told also Oxfam as well. And And I think the list is still growing, as Mithika had mentioned as we were starting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mithika and other ADs who've given that statement. Before we give an opportunity for media to ask questions, I want to invite any other AD online or here who wish to give solidarity statement. Meanwhile, you can have a seat so that tutawapea fiti, so that you don't tie. Anyone who wants to give solidarity statement? Yes. Yes, Susan.
Thank you for that. To cover, I believe I was greeting. Wanted to contribute that and put emphasis that countries have started setting aside funds, which means that they are recognizing that truly we have to address climate justice from a loss and damage perspective. Lastly, this is also to call upon the countries that have set aside aid towards supporting the countries in the south that are currently affected not to think of reducing the percentages of what they've set aside. We have countries like Sweden. Is just to say that countries in the north cannot afford to be Eurocentric, as lives in Africa are threatened and lives in Africa are being lost. We have to think of a global family and where each life counts. I just wanted to make this contribution for you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I want to welcome Rabindra from International Alert, who is online, who wants to give solidarity remarks. 2 minutes. Rabindra from International Alert. Rabindra, can you hear me? Okay. Anyone else who wants to give? All right. Thank you so much for the responses. I want now to give an opportunity to media to ask questions as we close this session. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mercy from Inoro TV. My question would be, what do you think is the lasting solution to the drought menace now that you've given your suggestions and even the appeals to the leaders? Thank you.
I'll take a number. I'll take 5. Your name and the media house. Okay, you can respond to that as we wait for more questions.
Thank you very much, Mercy. There are a number of solutions that need to be put in place to address the climate issue globally, but particularly looking at the Horn of Africa, and even if you look at our own country, Kenya. How are we putting in place resilience mechanisms and working with communities then to be able to be resilient? And how then do we even work on early warning systems? Because drought takes a while before, it's not a one-off occurrence that surprises you. Sometimes we get a little concerned when we look at policy issues and policymakers globally making pronouncements that sometimes are a little risky to the climate context, and that expose then communities to severe shocks of the pandemic. And therefore then we need to put in place various mechanisms. We need to put in place early warning systems where communities then are able to identify drought as it comes at the onset of drought, and then be able to put in place then resilience mechanisms to support these communities to be resilient, for them to withstand the shocks of the climate crisis. We need to also have sufficient funding, and I think that's part of the commitments that we have put in place, the demands that we are making upon world leaders. Where is the money? And where does it go? What do we spend money on? Globally, we are talking about fossil fuels. Globally, we are talking about, mechanization, technology. But we are people, and we then must have water, we must have food, we must have this country, we must have this planet. How do we save the planet from global warming? What do we need to do then? Before we speak about the big agenda, how do we look at what forms that big agenda? Maybe I can also ask my colleagues to also support respond.
So these matters are human rights issues, and that's why we are demanding urgent action around addressing the issue of the droughts, because you find that it's children, women, and girls who are most affected by the drought situation. With adequate planning, with good early warning systems, as mentioned, building resilience of communities, supporting communities to have a livelihood, then they can be able to access food. So there needs to be investment in the most basic of things, food, shelter, and supporting communities to really be able to adapt to the changes that are happening because of climate change. And I think it's also important to really do a detailed vulnerability analysis so that we are well prepared, also understand who's most vulnerable, who's most excluded, and be able to plan and put monies and finance to support the interventions. So I think we need to look at it really from a human rights perspective, that people are involved, people are dying, and urgent action needs to be done so that we can save their lives.
Thank you. So I guess basically just in addition to what my colleagues have said, we are speaking about issues to do with food security here. And it's unfortunate that on an annual basis we have to keep talking about the same challenge, and we actually know where the problem is. In addition to the bigger picture, as Samson has mentioned, from a climate change perspective, I think the over-reliance on rainfall, which has been affected years in, year out by climate change impacts, is actually at the core of this conversation. And so while on the one hand, of course, we have to look at the bigger picture and the global issues around how do we respond to issues to do with climate change, how do we reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, the other question that we also need to address is how do we then promote food security, and how do we actually address issues to do with, for example, lack of rainfall. And I think looking at innovative mechanisms, in this case, for example, I think issues to do with over-reliance on rainfall on one hand, but at the other side also is, for example, irrigation. I think there's some of these practical interventions that governments should be looking at how to respond to. And if there's one thing I would want to agree with the current regime, I think is the whole new focus again about how do we promote smallholder farmers, for example, and food production in the country, I think for me becomes quite critical. But again, echoing the key question that everybody has been speaking about, all this requires finances. All this requires funding from both national government as well as from the international community in the tunes of $100 billion that has been committed over the years for both adaptation and mitigation, but I think giving prominence to issues around adaptation. We cannot be in a position to support our food production. We cannot be in a position to support smallholder farmers to actually be able to increase their agricultural productivity if then financing that is required to go towards that sector is not made available.
Thank you so much. Any last questions? Any more questions? All right. I'll make a few announcements before we give some closing remarks. I think so I'm informed that the statement will be shared in soft. Please see Philip or Kitanzi or Henry or at the back who can share with you. We are going to serve breakfast. Sorry. You want to say something?
I wanted to add on what our sister asked. For the pastoralist, the best way we can serve their life for water is by harvesting water during the rainy season. Instead of looking for water from a far place, to have our dams where they live, so that the flowing water to the river can be harvested to the dams.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that response. I want to just say thank you also to everyone. Before we give some closing remarks, I'd made a few announcements. There'll be tea served. Please take some tea before you leave. And also for media, please see Henry after your tea. I'll give Nitin and Mary a few minutes to just give a vote of thanks, starting with Mary.
Habari zenu tena. Tunashukuru sana, asante kwa sababu ya yale tumezungumza na chenye ambayo iko tunaomba ipate kutekelezwa kwa haraka sana. Ingine ninataka kuongezea kidogo kama vile mwenzangu Maka ameongea, ni ya kwamba hata kama tuko na hizo dams, tukitengenezewa hizo dams, ninaomba pia serikali wapate kutoa wanyama wanaitwa ndovu. Kwa sababu hizo dams ukijaribu kuangalia upande ambayo mimi nimetoka, ni hao ndio wameharibu. Tungekuwa na maji, lakini zimeharibu kwa sababu hakuna kitu inaweza suilia ndovu. Inaharibu tu kila mahali. Kama ni mapipes zinang'oleka, wanang'oa wakitafuta maji. So tunaomba pia serikali wakuja warudishe hizo wanyama wao, ndio tukisaidiwa kutengenezewa mahali pa maji, at least hatutakuwa tena na hiyo shida. So hata hii imekuwa another disaster ambayo inatusumbua. So mimi nashukuru sana, ninaomba serikali, naomba NGOs wapate kutusaidia tafadhali, kwa sababu ni uhai ya watu inaenda. Asanteni.
Before my colleague concludes, you see, when you hear these community representatives, people have assumed that we have no solution. We have our own solutions. Communities have their own solutions. You can see the climate crisis and why we have combined people who campaign on climate change, humanitarian, community, and the faith, is that we have limited the debate on climate change in a very isolated manner that is an environmental issue. We need to look at this in a broader sense. Is the issue of development, is an humanitarian issue, is a moral issue, because those who have caused this problem of climate change are the ones actually who should pay these women. They don't go to view animals. These are actually tourists. Because of this drought now, you can see there is increased human-wildlife conflict. And we don't look at this in a broader sense. So this is a cross-cutting issue, and that's why we decided that we are going to back our humanitarian organizations which are in distress, which are responding, so that we broaden this focus and they see, like the lady who has asked a question about the long term. We have the solution. Kenya, for instance, all of African countries have all the strategies. The National Climate Change Action Plan 2018 to 2023 for Kenya was done. We participated in doing it. A very beautiful document, but it has just ended. It is ending 2023 as just a document. That's the tragedy. That's the problem. Actually we know what to do. We have the solution. We have the ideas. Donors come and help us, very expensive consultants, to do very good documents, very good strategies, but they end just in the shelves of government ministries. It is the time for action. If we have to solve this crisis, we really need to go to the people, empower the people with their solutions. We don't need a lot of strategies. We don't need action plans. Let these donors, as we have said here, we need the money. The solution here is the money, and for the government is the transparency. The lady was asking her, yes, we saw the relief food being released yesterday, and I think you took it a bit lightly. But now our question is, how is it going to reach these people? That is the most, even the climate finance money, even the relief fund, the problem actually is accessed by these people who need it, who are at the front line of this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. I think as we come to a close, I really appreciate everyone over here, particularly ActionAid, for championing this cause. We are the stakeholders and partners supporting this cause. It is, as the saying goes by Mahatma Gandhi, The world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's want. And many a times, the money that is being trickled down, when it reaches the community, is a very minimal fraction of what has been pledged or proposed. And that is what we are here to look and to champion out for. There is a lot of resources available. There are a lot of ideas. There are a lot of strategies in place. But the only aspect is for us to action it out. We need that money and the resource available that is being used in other areas where the need may not be as dire as what we see right now in the Horn of Africa. So I would like to thank every one of us here present online as well as face-to-face for putting out their voice, for making sure that we are heard and that we bring into account people's actions for the betterment of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, online participants. We've come to a close of this event. Thank you.